You ordered food, or you had food Sunday night.
I'm not going over my eating habits while I'm on this thing.
Well, I'll go over your eating habits. How's that? So you're going over, I'll go over. So I was saying to Lou, so what is today, Tuesday?
Today's Tuesday, yes.
So last night, it's like 9:30. If I went to bed at like 9 o'clock every night, I'd be in tip-top shape. So 9:30, I don't know why I did it, but I just ordered Chipotle.
There's a place around for that?
Yeah, well, it was Chipotle. It was 9 o'clock. And I had 3 tacos, a Coke. They sell the Cokes, like, the old-fashioned Cokes in the bottle.
Oh, in the bottle.
Yep. So that, Coke, and a burrito. But I didn't eat one of the tacos, so it was like 2 tacos, a burrito, and the Coke. And about 2:30, 3 o'clock, oh, it was bad.
Was it? Yeah.
It was like...
See, I don't mind eating late.
Yeah, no, it was yeah. It wasn't pretty.
Oh, well, last night at Lemoyne, it was because the day before would have been graduation.
Oh, that's right.
So they had a festive meal, which meant some kind of beef. I don't know.
Are the guys in the house?
They're okay. And then a lobster, it was surf and turf lobster. What do you call it? Mac and cheese.
Oh, that's
so,
nice.
Yeah, and then, because I had 2 glasses of wine, which means when I came back here, I fell asleep on the couch.
It is interesting that you don't want to talk about your food habits, but you're willing to say how much you drank.
Oh yeah, I have no problem with that.
Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm here with Lou, and the last time we spoke was maybe a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that we had talked about since then was the kind of sense of loneliness and isolation. And I shared with Lou, I mean, I'm an introvert, I'm naturally an introvert, so it doesn't mean I don't like people, it just means that I get energy from kind of being quiet and prayerful and reflective in that. Whereas Lou, I think, you're a natural extrovert.
No, I'm not.
Really?
I'm not an extrovert. Nope.
Really?
Yep.
So, what exhausts you as an introvert? Like what?
Well, you exhaust me.
I shouldn't laugh when you're making fun of me, but that was kind of funny. I think we'll edit that out. Setting aside how Lou just heard me.
People exhaust me.
We, as a family, we do this Zoom call every Sunday, and it's great. My nephew Corey sets it up, and he's so good about it, and everyone's on. And so the first couple times it was good, and I don't always make it. I wish I could make it all the time, but I don't always make it. But like the last time we had it, and I was on, I found myself accentuating my aloneness, because everyone's on and they're all at their own individual homes, but they all have other people in the house, whether it's a family or a spouse or they all have somebody, a human person, other than me and Bruno. And so we're on the call, and it was just hard, you know what I mean? And I got off the call and I felt badly, and I thought to myself, geez, why do I feel badly? Because it's not about the call, because Corey's great about that. And it's not about my family. And it was only in reflection that I thought to myself, well, I feel badly because it accentuates being alone. And so the whole thing with the pandemic, at first it was fine, but it's become harder. And I thought as an introvert it wouldn't hit me as hard, but I was just dead wrong about that. Yeah. Has that affected you?
Well, it's gone on for a while, so I'm aware. I make a distinction, and this comes out of a whole nation experience, because I've had to do the 30-day silent retreat twice.
So for people that have never heard about that, can you share that?
Yeah. So that's part of our formation training, and so we do it twice in our formation years, and it's actually 35 days of silent prayer. And so what that taught me was the difference between isolation, which is the problem these days, and solitude. And that's a positive experience.
Yeah. The solitude component.
Solitude can be a rich experience.
I hear that, yeah.
Yeah. So, besides being an introvert, I enjoy my own company.
I learned that about myself in middle school.
Oh.
I enjoyed it because it was just easier, you know. And as we get older, it's sometimes harder. And you know, when we're at those ages in our life where we're awkward in forming relationships and friendships, then I never took into account that I was an introvert, you know. But it only was after formation that I kind of understood extrovert, introvert, and that introvert's not a bad word.
No.
Would you say that most people in ministry are introverts?
I would think so. Most people in religious life, I'm not sure about the other expressions of church, but it's certainly in the studies that have been done, most people in religious orders are introverts.
Yeah.
So they kind of, you know, naturally respond to the dynamics of community life. So,
Lou, do you think there are people out there that we hear the word extrovert and introvert, and we use it as a colloquialism? Can you express it and define it from a spiritual point of view, and a spiritual and a kind of clinical point of view?
Yeah, I think it's they say it's a way you take in the data coming from your experiences. So if you and I are introverts, and what happens, what I'll tell you, and this is kind of like you know, a thumbnail sketch of it. It's that in order to make sense of the world around me, I've got to think about it. I've got to reflect on it. I have to process it, and I have to do that internally. I can't. I don't need help.
Right.
Don't help me.
Yeah.
Let me go through the process internally, interiorly, and then I can express the wisdom that comes out of experiences. But what I would say to you, once I've processed it, I still don't need your help. Don't butt in.
So, like, you say that, but you're not speaking to me individually. You're
no,
saying
just
the collective.
For example,
Because I do need your help, so I'm just putting that out there.
no. So it's that once I come to terms with the experience, I'm done with it, and I will tell you what the wisdom will be, but I don't need you to reflect on it yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just saying this is it.
And try to make you feel better about it, right? Because sometimes people do that, right? They're like, you know, well, let me explain to you why you're not bad.
Yeah, I mean, that'll drive me crazy when they decide to tell me how to deal with something. I don't, you know, I've done it. I've done it already. Well, for an extrovert.
So just as a word of caution for any of us, we don't want to tell Lou aspects of his homily that should be improved in any particular way, because it will not be received well.
No, so why? It's done with. I'm done with it. Why? You know, so there's no room for
Right.
for you know a critique.
So a happy medium could be like if we have numbers in the pews, you know, so when you're in the middle of a homily, like, you know, 10.0 from the Russian judge, you know, 5.0 from the American judge.
No, that wouldn't help.
That wouldn't help either.
No, because once I get into that ambo with my iPad, I'm already done with it. You know,
Yeah.
I've done it. So
Prayed about it.
yeah,
Right.
I've processed it, and so I'm done with it. As opposed to, like, if you're an extrovert, you can't think, you can't process without involving the world. You know, you run into people like that who...
And by the world, it could be one or two people or three people.
Externally, it's another source.
Right.
And extroverts need that in order to process. They can't do
And
it
to
on
find
their own.
meaning in what they're doing.
Right.
Right.
Can't do it on their own, because that's not the way they process data coming in.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think there's a bias against, people in culture and society when someone says, oh, don't mind so-and-so, they're an introvert?
Yeah, because it means the colloquial response to that is that it's, they're antisocial,
Yeah.
they're unfriendly, they're painfully shy,
They might be that anyways, but it's
They
not
might
because
be.
of them being an introvert.
They might be that and be an extrovert.
Right, yeah.
Which would be doubly painful for them. So that's not a character description. It's more kind of the description of how the human psyche responds to data coming in from the outside.
And if you've never taken time to reflect on that, look at maybe some of the social occasions that you've had in your life, and think about being at a cocktail party or some kind of family or holiday gathering, more so holiday gathering where you don't really know everybody. So an introvert would go in there, and if they're forced to interact with every person or a lot of people, they'll step back from that and be exhausted. Whereas the extrovert will go in and they'll be excited because they find energy from the more people.
Right.
So for more people, it's like the kryptonite. For introverts and for extroverts, it's kind of like adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So when I had the experience reflecting upon it, the phone call with the Zoom with family, and I felt lonely. I talked about it with my spiritual director. And I said, help me walk through this, And he said, for the first time in a long time, we've all been forced to be in a situation that no one expected, no one anticipated. If you're going to go on a 30-day retreat and it's a silent retreat, you're going to prepare for that. But we've been forced in these situations, and we've never had we've never been forced to reflect on whether or not we're introverts or extroverts. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like we're trying to build a plane as we're flying it. Mm-hmm. And that's hard for people.
It is hard for people, but I think the way this has been forced on us, it's almost like a sense of imprisonment. It's almost as if the world, our worlds have shrunk. So, yeah.
In your family or growing up, your friends, how would you explain to people how to deal with that? So here we are in this pandemic, and everyone's kind of trying to deal with it the same way, in different ways. And some work, some don't work. But I think all of us feel that it's going on too far and we're anxious, and we start to perseverate. I can't tell you, we both talked about that we don't get as much sleep, and the routines is finished, but how do we deal with it? How are we aware of what we are? How do we engage that, and how do we turn it around?
Well, I can see an example of how you deal with it is to use the word perseverate.
I love that word.
I know you do.
I love that word. Yeah.
You even draw out the pronunciation.
It's the only word I say slow. Everything else is, doggone damn fast. So we're also having a bit of a game, so if people can measure and guess how many times I say in the course of the conversation, they get one prize. And if they can count the times I use the word perseverate, you'll get a second prize.
Well, I'll admit that I think the last time you preached, you used it twice.
I did not.
You did, because I had to go back and I had forgotten what the word means because I never used it. I never
you didn't know what it meant.
I had a sense of it, but it wasn't. It wasn't locked in. It's not a word I use.
Yeah. Well, because you didn't know it, I hope you didn't perseverate about that fact.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. I've got words on my bathroom mirror that I have to use, and I just haven't changed the word from perseverate. So we're gonna get a whole new word next week. So go ahead. So how do they engage it? Well, how do people engage introvert, extrovert, and kind of turn the corner on it?
Well, I think you come to terms with your relationship with the world around you.
Yeah.
That's what this means, whether being an extrovert or an introvert. Now, I've learned to deal with the outside world, to make it wider. But part of the deal for me as a kid was I came from a big family.
Yeah.
My mom had 4 siblings,
And you're all in the same big brownstone?
No, that was my mom's family. So in Jersey, just on the other side of the Hudson River, my dad's family, he had 9 siblings. Now, they were all married, all producing children, cousins, just always the big crowd.
Yeah.
So that was consoling, but there were times when it was really kind of like invasive. And I think I could say to you, that may be where my sense of introversion comes from. I needed to set boundaries.
Yeah.
And I needed, certainly I know this is probably more important, that I needed to set boundaries for overbearing parents. My parents were, for the both of us, were overbearing.
How would you mean, like overly invested?
Overly protective because they had lost. I wasn't the firstborn. I was the first to survive. One after me, I think a girl that did not survive, actually, and my sister. So 2 out of 4. So they really was more than hands-on.
Yeah.
It was really, it was super protective. And my response, my sister too, our response was to fend that off.
Yeah.
It was suffocating.
Sort of react to that in a strong way, so that it wouldn't happen again, or as often.
Well, you just react. It becomes part of your makeup, your psychic makeup, and I'm always. I guess the antennae are always up for the threat of being invaded
or managed.
Managed is another way of putting it.
I always.
You see how I would express it: invaded, rather than managed.
Yeah,
is
the just war theory is not lost on you, right? So like when my dad, when mom passed away, Dad was alone in the house for a while, and it was hard for him because for the last, let's say 3, 4, 5 years of mom's life, he was her primary caregiver, and there wasn't a breath that he took that she didn't take either. So they were in tandem every single moment of every single day. And then mom passes, and he's left with all this time, and it was shortly after that he moved in with me. He and the dog moved in with me. We lived together. I would have never expected that to be the blessing that it was, right? So I was selfish, and I'm like, I'm not really sure I want Dad to live with me. It's a whole different thing. And I wouldn't have chosen it, but it happened so quickly that I didn't have a chance to say, yes or no. And I was so wrong about it. And I was so wrong that that I thought in order for me to be happy that I needed to be an introvert, and being an introvert meant not having anybody around me. And when we lived together at that point in his life and my life, he talked, and it wasn't words that he would use a lot, but the idea of being sad or depressed. And he would talk about having a difficult time surmounting that sadness, because however we look at it, and even now, I know there's times during these past 10 weeks that I found myself depressed, and I can't name it to one specific thing, but I know that I'm sad that we're still not connected, we're still not with people. And to hear my dad talk about his sadness and depression, it's almost like it took the sting out of it. Like your parents' generation, my mom and dad's generation, they didn't talk about it.
No.
They didn't talk about depression and how that affected people. God forbid if they even wanted to talk to someone, to say, "Gosh, this is how I feel." Did you find it with your parents too?
Well, I would have been too dangerous to draw them in,
Right.
to
Even bring it up.
or even to bring it
Yeah.
up. So no, we never did. No.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say to you, the dynamic was my sister and I watched each other's backs because the 2 adults in the family, which is to say the parents, were overbearing.
Yeah.
So just intrusive. I mean, now they may not have been actually,
Right.
but that's my perception of it.
When you
So-
look at them in retrospect, do you think that your mom or dad were ever in a period of life where they felt depressed?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's, I could tell as soon as you asked that, I think immediately of the death of my paternal grandmother. I think put my dad into a tailspin for a while. But he had that larger family, so he had the support he needed. My mom had the same kind of response when her mother died.
Yeah. Wasn't that the danger though, right? So like for your dad, when his mother died, right? That he might have been in that state where he could be classified as depressed. But because there were so many other stimuli in the family relationally, that there wasn't a need to resolve it. So it's almost like you kicked the can down the road.
Right.
And the same would be true of my dad, I know that there would have been times when my mom was sick where he would have felt depressed, and yet he didn't have to articulate it because he didn't have to deal with it because he was, worried about my mom being attentive to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then, mom passes, and then it's still there.
Right.
It doesn't go anywhere.
Right, it doesn't have to go anywhere, and it needs, in order for it to go somewhere, to use that language, it needs to be processed. I reported to the provincial in our virtual meeting back in March, I think, that I know it's dangerous to self-diagnose, but I knew, because it's happened before, I knew that I was moderately depressed. I knew the telltale signs. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the way it happened to me was in a moment. There's one day, so Friday, 16, 15, so maybe Friday, March 13th, whatever that Friday was. It was a full day of work.
Yeah.
So in my head, the two parishes, the renewal center, the hospitals, it was all in place. I knew that something was rumbling down the road, but everything was in place as of Monday.
Right.
Then the following Monday, everything shut down. And
Like that.
everything came to a screeching halt. And that was damaging.
Yeah.
I know.
So was that event that triggered it for you? The event
that triggered it for me.
Monday, nothing goes back to normal.
It just stopped.
Yeah.
Like an earthquake, But I also know that being depressed isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it's a natural response. I think what they say is that depression can be seen as maybe kind of a psychological retreat, silent retreat.
Yeah.
Your psyche just kind of pulls in for a bit, and allowing you to kind of estimate the damage and what needs to happen and how you need to respond. And
It's the caution light, right? I mean, it's
a good way of putting it. It's a caution light.
like, that event you talked about, for me, and this is so corny, on the TV at the rectory, I can watch YouTube, right? So you can get news that you missed or whatever. And it was shortly, maybe a week and a half after the whole thing hit. And so it's maybe 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night, I can't sleep. So I get up and I turn the TV on, and I'm a little ADD or ADHD, whatever it is. My attention span can be very challenging, and it gets worse as I get older. Don't roll your eyes. So I'm watching TV and it's YouTube and it's these weddings, right? So it's like it was like father, daughter, first dances, all these things. And so I'm watching this, and some of the dances were really great, and they were all like 2.5 minutes long. And then they had a bunch of groomsmen that were brothers, and they did like a dance for their wife, and it was just great. But in the middle of it, I couldn't help but cry, and it was a tsunami of emotion. So Bruno sitting next to me like, "What the hell's wrong with you?" it was the weirdest thing, and you know, in reflection, I realized that I got emotional. I cried about it because I was sad, you know, and I hadn't dealt with the fact that that I'm feeling lonely because of the situation, that I'm not like.
But you were.
Well,
You were dealing with it.
but not cognitively until that moment.
Well, but that's what the tears would have been.
Yeah.
You were emotionally dealing with it.
Yeah. But if it hadn't happened, I don't think that I would have been as articulate psychologically to say, I get this. Now I get it, but it was like, it was more than the caution light. It was like the warning sign, there's a train crossing, you can't go. So it forced me to stop. And, you know, that night I got a great night's sleep because I was exhausted. And the next morning I talked to my spiritual director and I said, this is what I experienced, you know, help me to work through this. And he said just that. He says the first thing is to recognize that there's something wrong, right? And then to not see that as good or bad, it is, right? So emotions are not good or bad, they're subjective, they're not objective, they just are.
Right.
And that once you figure out what the emotion is, you reach out to people and you try to tackle it.
Well, they're saying there's been a lot of psychic damage that's going to have to be dealt with in the months and years ahead. But, you know, there's a sign, it's closer to St. Mary's on somebody's lawn, and it says, "Be strong."
Yeah.
That really is kind of misleading, because that sets up that straw man argument. You got to be strong in this. I got to be tough. No. Well, I think for some people, maybe the better response is just to kind of collapse into a puddle of tears.
Yeah.
You know.
But like for my dad and probably your dad, it wasn't in their nature, and for them to, you know, back in the day, for them to do that, I can't think of any of my dad's friends that he would have done that, or he would have done it in front of my mom. They were so conditioned.
Right. My dad did it after my grandmother died, and after the funeral, and I remember going back home with them to stay that weekend, and he went into their bedroom, and I could hear him sobbing in there.
Yeah.
He wouldn't do it outside the bedroom.
And you know, it sets us up for a very lonely experience. You know, so you talk about the sign, you know, be real strong. You know, and maybe an addendum to the song, the sign would be, you know, be real strong together. You know, so right, so acknowledging that it doesn't always work out like we want it to work out. We're not meant to be as strong as we want people to see us, right? And that we're all flawed. And that if we don't come to grips with it, then it's never gonna work. No. And do you think in the life of the church, and I know this is the case, but are there any saints that come to mind for you that dealt with something similar? Because you can't have an authentic relationship with God unless you know yourself, right? And so for saints to have a true relationship, an authentic relationship with God, they needed to know themselves and be authentic and transparent. It doesn't mean show their emotion to everybody, but they had to have that. I think about Dorothy Day. You know, she talked about the long loneliness. You know, and then she was in a certain situation in her life where maybe she couldn't share with those people that were with her how she was feeling, and that manifested itself in a loneliness that bordered on depression. And it was only after she faced that and dealt with it with other people that she, you know, actively sought out that she could turn the corner on it. I mean, so like in the Jesuit tradition, or just the history of the church, do you think that's the case with any saints?
Well, Teresa of Calcutta, you know, who admitted that she had been caught up in desolation, spiritual desolation for 10 years.
And that's from her diaries that came out after, right?
For 10 years.
Yeah.
So this sense of being alienated from God.
So if you haven't heard that, it's a great story. So, you know, St. Teresa of Calcutta, Mother Teresa, you know, after she passed away, she had these diaries. And in the diaries, she talked about how unbelievably lonely she was. And that was for 10 years. 10 years. But the public perception of her was far different during those 10 years. How did she say that she dealt with it?
she just soldiered on.
Yeah.
From what I remember reading, her focus was on, and it was the simplicity of it, making sure that dying people had the dignity of dying in a safe, secure place. It's off the streets of Calcutta.
Yeah. Lou does a lot of spiritual direction, and he has individuals that come to him for spiritual counseling, and you're excellent at that. If someone comes to you, if I come to you in spiritual direction, and you notice that that I'm depressed, what do you tell me? And I ask the question because I think a lot of us feel this way, and people that are watching it, maybe it's the people that are watching, maybe it's your son or daughter that you're having the experience with, or maybe they're watching it now and it's your parents. But tell us how you would address that with someone that comes to you in spiritual direction, and how would we as individuals address it? Because we don't want to stay in that place. If we stay in the place, we're never going to get better, and we can't expect somebody else to take care of it for us.
I wouldn't tell them anything, in a sense. I'm not trying to cure them. I'm not trying to be a Band-Aid.
Where would you lead them?
Well, I don't know. It would depend on what they were saying. But my job is to be with them. So a companionship, though, so that, because the terror isn't so much if there's a loss or if there's pain with a physical or a psychic. The terror is about the isolation. That's why, the terrible pain in the hospitals now, where COVID patients are necessarily physically isolated for their own protection and the protection of others, but that, the price to be paid, psychically.
So in that situation, they come to you, you're not going to tell them how to fix it, but you're going to encourage them first to recognize it, and then to know that you will walk with them.
Right, I would say I listen. So people communicate with more than words.
Right.
So all of the communication, body language, facial expressions, the language that's used, all of it, and whatever emotions, surface to catch that, and then simply to say, this is what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
Because that is so confirming. And
to validate their experience.
Exactly. Someone is standing with me or sitting with me.
And they've listened.
And they've listened, and they're with me in this. I'm not doing this. I'm not stuck by myself. Yeah.
Implicit in that is the reality that it's not fixed overnight. Not that it needs to be fixed, but you're not led out of this overnight. So acknowledging the situation, recognizing that they need not journey alone, and the third being that the journey's not going to end in a night. And that once you're in a better place, it doesn't mean that you're not going to go back there. But at least now you have the tools to kind of tackle it.
And they've always had the tools, because this is when Francis talks about the church being a field hospital. That's my image of spiritual direction, to use that language, that sense of being in companionship with someone, and the healing is taking place through the agency of God's Spirit. It needs time. It needs a sense of understanding and acceptance, and trust.
But when you think about like Pope Francis and the whole idea of saints, I think saints come to know who they are by engaging in their own life experiences, right? And getting through difficult times is not having it all figured out, but recognizing that there are people that you journey with that help you to figure it out, and that no matter who we are, no matter what our vocation, that we can't journey alone, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. And if you journey alone, there's always problems.
You can't do it alone.
You can't. there are people that even sisters like the Dominican sisters, the cloistered sisters that you found on Court Street. You would think that here they are, they're cloistered, they have not a lot of contact with the outside world. I'd say master them once in a while, and there was like maybe 10 sisters. And I used to think that they didn't really, talk a lot. But I remember going back and, they really enjoyed their community, and they said that that was their lifeblood. And they understood the Eucharist as a sign of being a community with other people that shared that same Eucharist. So even they, in their state of solitude, understood that they were still connected.
Oh, yeah. And I think maybe that's the great learning of this experience, because we are that sense of cohesion, community, the communion among us has been shattered because of the illness. I've seen that online when people have responded from either of these parishes about missing, the community. And I think that really is a truth that's being, identified.
Well, it's internal, right? I mean, like Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they rest in God. But even before that, our hearts are restless until they understand that they can also rest in people, right? And it's very hard for the Eucharist to make a lot of sense in solitude, right? And I think so. We talk about people that are not here, the people that we love and serve. And that story that I cried that first Mass that I celebrated because it was so foreign, but we're all tied to be in community and the journey together, and that's why it feels foreign, because the Eucharist that we celebrate, we're acknowledging what's on the table, but we also have to acknowledge what's around the table, and I can't take credit for that. That's Tom Servatius' line. It's a great line. But it is true, and right now we're not there, and that's part of the holy longing.
Right, we're not there, but we know we can identify the signposts that are leading us to the deeper truth. It's so what have we lost actually? Well, Sunday observance, Sunday gatherings, but it goes much deeper than that.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's what we're learning.
Yep.
What is communion actually?
And never before have we been forced in such a focused way to understand what we miss and what's important. Right? So, coming out of this pandemic, whatever that looks like, whether it's gradual or immediate, we've come to understand that we miss the community and we miss the sacramental nature of church. One of the positive things that I think we're offering in both parishes with the ministry teams, we're trying to reach out to every parishioner in a phone call. I don't think that has been, we wouldn't have known the importance of that unless we had been in the situation, right? So it underscores and accentuates how important it is for us to stay connected.
Oh yeah, that's why it's, I'm exhilarated. So I ran into some parishioners last week. They was as a couple, and they were walking. It was the evening, so I did a U-turn to get back, just to stop for a moment and just to greet them, and it was fun to see their faces just light up.
Yeah.
I do that when I'm at Wegmans.
Is it similar to the way that my face lights up when I see you? Or not as much?
I'm not sure why your face lights up.
Yeah, it might be gas. I don't know. It's probably not. Yeah. It's a little GERD. Tell us about Wegmans.
Well, just, I'm also aware that what it says to them is that I'm a real person, that they would find me shopping at Wegmans, because there are biases, and the biases that you and I, we don't live in the real world.
Right.
That was, he said it jokingly, and he said it in endearing ways, but I know he meant it because he didn't understand. I remember my dad telling the family once that the reason I had entered the Jesuits was to take an early retirement.
I still have friends in
Like it wasn't a real job.
Yeah, I got friends and family say, gosh, what's it like to work, a day and a half a week? Oh, I love it. Like eating bonbons and watching soaps, I don't miss Bryson Wright ever again, But don't you think, like, the whole idea of being a part of community is that, like, for me, to be just myself, right? So to be truly myself and to be transparent and authentic. And that doesn't happen overnight. But I think at both parishes, St. Augustine's and St. Mary's, I think we both feel the same way, that we can be honest about ourselves and be true to who we are and allow people to witness that. And that's part of pastoring too, right? To say that we are who we are by God's grace, and God's grace or does has not been in vain. And that we'll have good days and bad days. We'll have days where we're very exuberant, and days when we're melancholy. But we're all on that same journey together, recognizing our space in the context of that journey.
Right.
So how do you think, when we look at kind of bringing this to a close, what do you think is important for people to understand if they are isolated or that they find themselves depressed? What would you tell them as we close this, for them to know that, one, it's okay, and two, they know where at least to turn to if there's a need?
Well, Ignatius Loyola would challenge people in the 16th century with his conviction that God is found in all human experience. So the challenge gets to be, if you want to use this language, what's the silver lining in this experience? What's the grace? Where do you find God in this experience? Because that sense of isolation, how do I put this? It's a little too, ultimately it's a little too self-serving.
Yeah.
As they say, you got to get over yourself.
Right.
You've got to see that world, that real world out there beckoning. And because without you, that world out there is poorer.
Yeah.
So
and our churches are poorer. I mean, and not in a financial way, but in a theological way, that the mystical body of Christ in some way is not what it could be because of their absence.
Yeah, I've said that to people, I don't know how many times, when they start complaining, and they had.
I find it hard to believe.
Oh yeah.
People complain?
Well, they had something. They had a beef against their pastor. No names.
He talks too fast. I can't understand what he's talking about. Slow down.
Oh, that's nothing.
Let Father Lou and the deacons preach more, for God's sake. Yeah. No more stories about the damn dog. Those are like the top three.
Those are the top three?
Yeah, top three.
Oh. Well,
I don't run through the others. Let that go.
My experience has been, though, that whatever I'm called to do, I can't do it without the community. And I've had experiences where I find myself held down by the resistance of a community, dealing with issues that need to surface. With issues of injustice, even within the church. Yep. And there's some that will react against that. And I find that becomes a straitjacket for me. And it's holding me down. And then there are other experiences with the church where I have just felt exhilarated. And I can really spread my wings, because it's the support and the care of the community that's pushing me on.
Right.
So I would say,
empowered.
you and I, empowered. You and I don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
And we can't do what we need to do, living on that, the pinnacle of the mountain.
And if you're home, and you encounter someone who's struggling with isolation or depression, that it's not our job to fix it. right? Our job is to allow people to acknowledge it and see it and understand it, and then walk with them in that journey. But it's not our job as a parent or a grandparent or a spouse or a sibling to fix it, because it's not ours to fix. You have to walk through it and to
Right.
be present and to pray for them.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Any last words?
I don't know.
I think good.
I can't, yeah, I think that's it. You know, I guess
I find it hard to believe that a Jesuit has no last
I'm not
words.
done.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. Totally knew that. It was all effect. It was all effect. I'm saying, oh, I don't know if I got anything else to say. And then it comes across as more like, oh, he's so quick on his feet.
Are you finished?
I am now.
The only thing I will say is that, as I just mentioned a few moments ago, look for the silver lining. Look for the grace of the presence of God in what this experience has been for you. I think the truth is there. Even if this is and it is a devastating experience, it's a human experience.
Yep.
And it's got us all together. And so God is part of the experience. And so the way out of it is to find where God is. Oh,
And that's grace.
that's grace.
So we take the flaws in our life, we acknowledge the flaws in our life, and we allow God's grace to shine through those. In the flaws, we allow ourselves to be transparent and authentic, because it's much easier to walk with someone when we're transparent and authentic.
Right.
And for all those things that are challenges that just seem unbelievably heavy, it's important for us not to perseverate about those. So perseveration.
That's 3 times.
Right, so that's a
now.
little inclusio. We started with it, and I can't spell it, but
P-E-R.
don't be show off. So we just don't want to perseverate. So again, thank you, Lou, and thanks,
Thank
Meg,
you,
and thanks
Cliff.
everybody for watching. And if you want to count how many times I said there's a prize that's set aside, and how many times I used the word perseverate.
4 times.
Is it 4? I think it's 5. Is it 5, Meg?
I thought it was 4.
Is it 4?
Yeah.
Okay. Perseverate. It's 5. Thanks, everybody.